Hello and welcome to today's lesson. We're looking at data management, and in particular today we're looking at the idea of data anonymisation. And it's part of a series of lessons all around the idea of managing data within Sage CRM. And you can see that we started this question of the management of personal data a few lessons ago. And so we've been looking at the idea of the introduction to the data privacy laws that exist around and actually shape the environment in which businesses operate, and the obligations that places on organizations for the management of customer data. And we've continued this in thinking about the nature of consent, and how that can be managed inside Sage CRM. And we're now looking at the idea of anonymisation, and in the next couple of lessons we're going to be looking at the idea of the removal of data that needs to be completely eliminated from the system, and then going on to think about the idea of understanding how data flows between different systems, so you can start to see the scope of data flow within Sage CRM and understand where else you'll need to look to manage the responsibilities. So in particular, we're going to look at the knowledge needed to understand how Sage CRM can be used to anonymize personal data. And this is the type of management of data that it has to satisfy legislation such as the GDPR, so that individuals, data subjects in the language of GDPR, have the right to be forgotten. So they have a right to have their data go. Now, as part of this, we're going to look at how easy it is inside Sage CRM to actually satisfy that, but also how difficult it is to satisfy that, because you need to make sure that you are correctly managing the data, not only in the one system, but all of its links out, so wherever the data sits. Now, mitigating the risk of non-compliance with regulations like GDPR requires you, first of all, to have a data management strategy. Where Sage CRM fits into this, it is that it's there to provide you with tools that allow you to protect and manage that personal data, but it isn't the strategy itself. That's something that you need to look at. But the tools that we have around data management inside Sage CRM are, as we've seen, management consent. We're now looking at the idea of data anonymization and thinking in terms of also, we'll touch on the idea of pseudonymization as well. We are looking at the question of the deletion of communications, the deletion of documents, and then the flagging of externally shared information. That's the extent of the features that Sage CRM provides. But let's remind ourselves, first of all, what this is all about. Sage CRM, because it's a customer relationship management system, inevitably ends up storing personally identifiable data, or PII, PID, personally identifiable information or data. The terms are interchangeable, but this refers to anything that can be used to identify a natural person, and it encompasses a lot of different data points. And the natural person being managed is then the data subject. And we have responsibilities to be able to protect any PII that we have in our system. So if we want to be forgotten, if our customers want to be forgotten, they should be able to be forgotten. And there are a number of different principles that we're going to be looking at. So GDPR identifies personal data as any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person. And so a person could be identified directly by this information. An obvious example is the name of the person and their email address. But for example, we can actually have indirect identification through the use of a social security number, or where we have got information stored that together with other information would allow that person to be identified. So for example, a mobile telephone number combined with a postcode or a employer would perhaps be enough to be able to zoom in and identify who is the person at the other end of the telephone, for example. So you must inform users if you are collecting and using any of their personal data, and make them aware of the policies that you have that govern that. And there are some principles involved in this to do with concision, how short your policy should be so that they are transparent and easily accessible. Now, all of this we've looked at before, and the idea that in all of this, you've got a number of different core principles of lawfulness, fairness and transparency. Data processing has to be obvious to the data subject. There has to be a clear, limited purpose for the data. So data should be collected only for explicit, legitimate purposes. That's all the consent that we were looking at last week, and the idea of minimization of data. So only the necessary data should be collected. If you have no need for a date of birth, you should not be collecting the date of birth. If you have no need for the middle name, you do not record the middle name. So it is the minimize thing, and then only data should be kept for as long as necessary as well. So if you're no longer interacting with a customer, then you shouldn't be storing that customer data at all as soon as that interaction has stopped. And there has to be also a way in which that data has to be secure, because you have data protection, as in misuse responsibilities as well. All of this has to be put, as we've outlined, in the idea of a policy that you have and a strategy that you have, but everything that you do, you have to be able to demonstrate potentially that you have done everything in your power that is reasonable to demonstrate compliance with data legislation. And so when it comes to anonymisation, the things that leap out immediately are to do with purpose limitation. You want to be able to, you've used and stored a person's personal identifiable information for a short while, but you no longer need it, so you should be able to get rid of it. That's the purpose limitation. You should be able to get rid of anything that you don't need to completely get rid of it. And you also need to get rid of it in a time frame which ensures that the data is managed in your system for only as long as it needs to be in your system. So far, so good. But I've raised the question then, you should be able to get rid of data, but what if you need to get rid of customer data? We're going to see that we're going to do that through the process of anonymisation, and anonymisation is the recommended approach for most of what we do within Sage CRM in terms of implementing the customer's right to be forgotten. So this concept of erasure is the same as obliteration. So you are actually getting rid of their data so that it is no longer accessible. So anonymisation is the recommended approach for the implementation of the right to be forgotten for a data subject. And it's the way, because deletion of records, as we're going to see in the next couple of lessons, has its own challenges. For example, if you delete a company, that could have a big impact on the integration with the accounting system. But you'd also have to have, when you come to deleting a person record or even a lead, you'd have to have an understanding of how that record fits into the hierarchy of other records within the system. So you might have, if we think about the experience of deleting a person record, if we're really deleting a person record, what does it say about the removal of an opportunity associated with that record? What does it say about communications, the letters that have been sent to them, which are all may well be required from an audit point of view? And there's the whole question about all of the commercial and operational impacts that you have. So would it be right to delete those opportunities and cases? How would it affect the performance stats for the individual users and teams within your system? So simple removal of data is not necessarily what you want to do when it comes to erasure of customer data. You may find it's much better, in order to keep the historical information that could be used to calculate future conversion rates or forecasting rates, actually to obliterate and anonymize the data. Inside CRM as well, and this is another thing about the nature of deletes, is that when users think they're deleting things, they're not performing what's called a hard delete. They're flagging the record as non-accessible to the main user interface. When you mark a record as deleted, there is a flag set within that record and it is removed. And that flagging of soft delete is not something that is truly doesn't satisfy the idea of data anonymization, because it is recoverable data. So any personal data that has to be removed from a person in order to satisfy the whole question about the erasure of personally identifiable information, or PID data, it is to do with anonymization, even if you then go on to delete that data. Now, let's see about doing this. So customers, you're going to need perhaps to remove a group of customer data. So imagine you've carried out an import some years ago of lead data from a conference, and that now has expired. You have not had contact with these people. You have no continued ongoing permission to use them. There's no permission or consent to market to a large group of contacts. So you need to start thinking about the anonymization of a group of fields, or obliteration of a group of a mass of data in a set of records. And we can use the mass update functionality to do this. So if I'm going to log on here, you can see that I've just come in. I've logged on as the system administrator. And if I go into a group, this is where, by the way, I have already enabled in my system mass operations. That's something that is set by the system administrator in the system behavior screen, and it affects all system administrators and info managers with user rights. They will then be able to do this, and I can go in now and carry out by looking at the lead group that you can see here, and you can see that I've got these records. Now notice here I have got some personally identifiable information contained here. Now I might have had a set of correspondence with these people. I might, if they were actually person records, I might have opportunities hanging off them, all this. But here, if I am to get rid of the personally identifiable information, I can use the mass update feature to do this. I can click on the mass update, and here I can mark the fields that I want to obliterate. And so I've marked just a few of these. You could argue that I could extend this out to the mobile phone numbers and etc. in here as well, but this is what I'm going to obliterate. And to do that, now as I click on continue, I can change the fields to put in the substitute characters that will mean this data is gone. So whatever was there is now gone and substituted, and I'm going to substitute it with the classic XXX. So this is gone. And I could equally have put in and said removed in capitals, for example. Here, if I save this, it's going to warn me that it's going to update all those records, and I confirm that, and you can see that that's happened. And if I go back and now look at this, if I click into the list, you can see there that my list has been obliterated. And this, though, doesn't solve everything for me. Has that anonymized the data? Well, this is a yes and a no, because it really depends on what else has happened. So, for example, you've got two ideas here, pseudonymization and anonymization. Now, pseudonymization is the process of personal data in such a way that it can no longer be attributed to a specific data subject without the use of additional information. Anonymization is the processing of personal data in such a way that the data subject is no longer identifiable. That sounds okay. Now, surely this is all right. Well, if we think about pseudonymization, that's where pseudonymization, data that is pseudonymized is still considered personal data under data privacy legislation like GDPR, because it can be re-identified if you go back and combine it with something else. And so you don't escape from the responsibilities of GDPR. Just because it looks like you don't have that data doesn't mean that you do. You don't have that information, because you can get it back. True anonymization is that it is irrecoverable. The process is irreversible, that there is no way to link anonymized data back to the original subject. So if you've got backups, this immediately creates a situation that you haven't anonymized the data. Because if you have a working Sage CRM database that records the details of a person, that's all of the name, email, all of the PII, and each person record has a unique ID, which it does, and you take a backup of that database to create a second database elsewhere as part of your data, your responsibility as a IT professional. If you change all of the person records to XXXX, so you obliterate the data in the CRM database, but you leave the unique IDs in place, and you still have that backup database, you've only pseudonymized the data, because you can restore all of the lost data from the backup. It's a bit of a process, but you could go in and you could look it up. So the data in the database CRM, the CRM database that we think that we have obliterated actually remain subject to GDPR, including all of the obligations regarding data protection and data subject rights, because you have a backup and it's still considered personal data. And so that means that really you have to continue to apply all of the appropriate security measures to protect both the original CRM database and the backup database, since the data is not anonymized and you have not erased the data as you think you have. Okay, now that's all I'm going to say about that. And we're going to think ahead into the future. So in the next 2 lessons, we're going to take this idea of anonymization and mix that with the idea of further data removal around communications and documents and the nature of hard and soft deletes inside Sage CRM, so we get to understand what we're doing there. Let's see if we've got any questions. Thank you so much, everyone. I look forward to seeing you at the next lesson. Bye-bye.